There are only a handful of guitar players in the entire world who are instantly recognizable when you hear them. Eddie Van Halen, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton. When you hear those guys, you know exactly who you're listening to, whereas everybody else kind of sounds pretty much like everybody else. But then you have some guys who are so unique and multifaceted that the greatest names in music go to these guys first to make them sound even better. And when you hear them, they are just as recognizable as some of the greatest musicians in history. And when some of the greatest musicians in history refer to you as being one of the greatest in history, it might be because you are among one of the greatest in history as well. Today's guest is Adrian Belew. Adrian's career has taken him from playing in Midwestern cover bands to being discovered by Frank Zappa, then being hired by David Bowie, then King Crimson, Talking Heads, and then to a critically praised solo career. He's also done session work with the Tom Tom Club, Paul Simon, Cyndi Lauper, Laurie Anderson, Joe Cocker, Nine Inch Nails, and there was also the wonderful side project known as The Bears. Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails once called Adrian Belew the most awesome musician in the world, and it's very hard to argue against that. Adrian Belew is about to release his 25th solo album this summer. It's called Elevator, and Adrian will talk about that record and a whole lot more. This is my conversation with the great Adrian Belew on Baxie's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
You and I almost met like 31 years ago, and I know you don't remember this, so let me explain what happened. It's 1990, and you and David Bowie are playing at Summerfest in Milwaukee, at an amphitheater just off of Lake Michigan. And I was working for a radio station at the time, and we're walking around the amphitheater, and lo and behold, there's David Bowie, and he's talking to a couple of people. You may even have been there for all I remember, but you know, when you're standing next to David Bowie, really the only thing you see is David Bowie. And you got like a solar eclipse, and he's the only thing you're actually looking into. And so we asked him, could we spend 5 minutes of his time interviewing him? And he said, well, you can have an interview with me and Adrian Belew, provided that your radio station is playing his brand new song, Pretty Pink Rose, which we were not. And we made the egregious mistake of answering him honestly. And and he said, well, then I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to talk to you guys. So we walked away completely dejected after our souls have been crushed. But then on the other hand, part of me was thinking, how cool is that David Bowie, cares enough about another guy and Adrian Belew to say, hey, you know what? If you're not supporting him, I can't support you. In a way, I couldn't feel too bad about it, but I just thought, man, clearly there was a friendship between you and David Bowie that really meant something to him. I just thought that was a fascinating situation that happened.
Well, you should have asked me, because I would have said yes without even thinking about whether or not you played my music.
You wouldn't have said, I don't know, do you play Suffragette City?
Yeah, I might have done that. Pretty Pink Rose was David's single, and he wrote the song, and he and I did the video together, so we shared in it. And of course, both of us were very interested in seeing it do well. But it didn't matter. I mean, regardless, yes, we were very close friends, and David was that kind of person. He would look out for his friends, and when you knew him as a personal friend, all the walls came down, of course, and you just loved the guy, and he liked you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was one of those records in 1990 that I probably played continuously for a couple of years. I mean, I knew that album so well. We got a promotional copy at the station, and I loved it. I loved every track on that record. And we went to go see David Bowie that night. And obviously, David Bowie is a tremendous performer, but I found myself focusing a lot on you because not only were you clearly enjoying yourself, but you were doing things on a guitar that most people, I don't think, have ever even thought of. Never mind the the noises and the musicality of it. But I mean, you're squeezing this guitar and dry humping it, and you're just doing everything you can to just get as much out of that instrument as possible. I found you almost just mesmerizing to watch, because I don't think a lot of people in that amphitheater had ever heard anybody play guitar like that.
Yeah, my wife said the same thing. That's the tour that I met her on in Orlando at the Peabody Hotel after our show in the lobby, and she said the same thing. She said, "Well, I didn't know you from anyone, but you were the one guy I kept watching."
and David never said to her, "Well, I can have you date Adrian Belew, provided, of course, you've played Pretty Pink Rose."
No, he didn't meet her right off the bat, but eventually he did.
I think the first time I became aware of you is I saw King Crimson play on this television show on ABC back in '81 called Fridays, and you guys played two songs on that show. The first one was being Elephant Talk, and I had been a Yes fan in high school, and I certainly knew Bill Bruford. But I'm watching this performance, and actually watched it again on YouTube, between you and Tony Levin and Robert Fripp, and I'm just thinking, my God, has there ever been a band with more talent between four guys ever? And I'm not sure I can claim that. It's like every great band's got one guy who's just kind of the weak link, but on that band, not a chance. Unbelievable performance by you guys.
Thank you. I remember it. All of that very well, of course, including the fact that the director saw me waving my guitar in front of the amp in Thelahun Jinjit and said, "Do you do that you're going to do that every time?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, well, we're going to put a camera right there so we can catch you doing that." I do remember Robert at one point while we were touring around the band in that era, 1981 through 84, with that quartet. We did 3 world tours and 3 records. That was the aim to begin with.
Right.
And somewhere along the line, after we'd done enough dates, Robert said to me one day, "I think this is probably the best live band in the world." And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, well, I don't really know who else would be better.
Yeah. I mean, what do you compare it to? I mean, again, the kind of craftsmanship between all four of you is astounding. And and these are not complicated. I mean, these are very complicated songs that you're playing, and this isn't like you're playing "Love Me Do" by the Beatles. This is hard stuff, and yet you guys just master it. Doing it on a record is one thing. Doing it live and then doing it on TV, which you guys did not do a whole lot of, was really remarkable.
Well, we always managed as part of our writing. We always decided, whatever we're going to put on the record, let it be what we would play live. And in fact, whenever Robert and I would finish a song or a piece of music to a certain point, and the band would take it from there and we'd start learning it, we would always save those things until we went out and played them through one tour. Because then we would know, okay, this is working, this isn't working. So the final detailing would happen there. And even in the first record, we went out and played shows before we made Discipline, so we could do that. So that was part of the band, let's don't go in and make studio albums that you can't replicate. Let's be a band playing live. And in the studio, we played live. We didn't separate out and say, okay, now the drummer takes his turn and so on. We were really a band that concentrated on live. And I think we always felt that the live performances were the most powerful aspect. The recordings were great, but they were just one recording.
Right.
Whereas when you go and play it live, different things happen as the tour extends. It's
also the first time, I think, in your career that your stamp as a songwriter was clearly felt. I mean, they had successful songs and successful albums, but they were not songs that were particularly, as melodic as you have written songs going forward. I mean, I think this is the first time that you had a chance to really kind of stretch out as a songwriter, if I'm catching the timeline correctly on this.
Well, you definitely are. From the beginning of teaching myself to play guitar, I taught myself to play because I had songs in my head I couldn't translate to the other members in the band. I was a drummer at the time, still love playing drums. So years later, when I'm in King Crimson, that was the first time, finally, all those years later, 12 or 15 years or so, that I was asked to do the thing I had been preparing to do all that time, which is be the songwriter, be the lyricist, write the melodies, be the front man, the singer. Up to that point, I had been the backup guy for Frank Zappa, David Bowie, Talking Heads.
Yeah.
Great, fantastic gigs, but none of them were asking me to do all of the things at once that I could do. So King Crimson really was a huge leap for me for those reasons, but also because it suddenly turned into being King Crimson. When we started, it was a band. Robert said, "Would you like to start a band with me and Bill Bruford?" Are you kidding? Of course. Later, we auditioned Tony Levin, phenomenal player, and then we thought we were going to be called Discipline. That's what Robert wanted to name it, but we didn't like the name.
Right.
Me and Tony especially said, no, not Discipline. That in America, that connotates not good things. So eventually one day, Robert walks in, and, okay, well, we're going to be called King Crimson then.
Fair enough.
And for me, that changed everything in a heartbeat, because I realized, oh, my God, well, King Crimson has a huge, expectation with it. And now you're going to be writing songs that are supposed to be, very, intelligent. They're supposed to at least represent the other people. You don't want to embarrass anyone. You can't really write too much personal stuff if you're leading that kind of band.
Wouldn't you, in a way, want to take like the easy road and, become the guitar player for, Eddie Money or 38 Special instead, rather than take on these complicated compositions? I heard an interview with Bruford a long time ago saying that every project, every song, every day playing with King Crimson was a little bit frightening, because you were just supposed to know what you were supposed to do, and it was like it ran like no other band that he had ever been in, and especially coming from Yes and then going to playing with Robert Fripp for years. It just sounded like a totally different type of, I don't know if it's an organization, but just a totally different approach to being in a band.
It certainly was. There were very few things that were allowed. I mean, I always made the analogy that if you had a box of 24 crayons, to be in King Crimson, you had to dump out all but 6 of them, and then you could draw with those 6 crayons. So there were a lot of things, musically speaking and otherwise, that just simply wouldn't fly in King Crimson. They would be on the editing floor before you knew what hit you. So right off the bat, you kind of learned what those expectations were and went with it, And the effect was it raised the level of commitment and the level of what the music would turn out to be. I mean, yeah, I could have played with Eddie Money, I guess, but wouldn't have been. I like everything I've done, so I'm not. I've tried a lot of different things. King Crimson was the most difficult, but it was also one of the most rewarding, at least in terms of my growth and things that happened for me. If you remember, just before that, I was playing with Talking Heads, and that was a really, really fun and easy band for me to play with. Most of their songs are kind of one chord. Well, at least on the Remain in Light album, the one that I played on.
Right.
So if you're the guitar player, soloist guitar player in the band, you're not the singer, the songwriter, none of that stuff, the front man. Man, what a gig. That's so much fun. But it was also, of course, limiting to someone who is planning and writing songs and had done that for a long time.
Right. Well, with Remain in Light, that was, it turned out to be a terrific record, but that was recorded kind of like in bits and pieces, very, Brian Wilson-like in a lot of ways. You played your part, and then you're done for the day. Well,
when I stepped into the picture and they asked me to come in to the studio for a day and work with them, Brian Eno, Jerry Harrison, and David Byrne, Chris and Tina, the rhythm section, were pretty, as you say, they were done. They weren't even in the studio that day. And I had one day. And the songs were really, there were no songs. They were just tracks. There was no vocals, no idea where the chorus would be or what the melody was or anything else. So one of the best examples I always make is the song called The Great Curve.
Yep.
I remember Eno and David saying, go out into the studio, put the headphones on, listen to the track for a while, and when you think there should be a guitar solo, play a guitar solo. So that's what I did, and it went really well. I could see them very excited, jumping around behind the screen in the control room. So I thought, okay, I'm going to let it play a little longer and put a second one in.
Yeah. Well,
and the idea was that they had already told me, David, we'll write the song around where you put the guitar solos. Strange way of doing it.
Very strange, but yet that song in particular is probably the most hypnotic on the entire record. I mean, Once in a Lifetime is a great one, but The Great Curve is probably one of my favorite songs on that record. One, because I know the moment your guitar is in that song, I know exactly who it is. I know exactly who's playing it, and that doesn't happen very often with a lot of guitar players. Like you're so identifiable when you play, and whether it's between them or the Bears or anything else you've done, it's like when Adrian Belew plays, I'm like, I can identify that from a mile and a half away.
Well, that's really something to be able to say that. I guess that's true. A lot of people that are close to me have said that. Rob Fetters from the Bears, for example, played through my gear once and said, I can't sound like you even with your gear. Because that's not what it's about. It's about your thought processes and how you put things together in your mind. He knew that, of course. We joked about it. But, it is rare. I think most guitar players are very much into what other guitar players are doing, trying to match that. I noticed that there's a lot of shredders who sound a lot alike. There's a lot of country guys who sound a lot alike,
Yep.
To not sound like anyone was what I was hoping for. So what I started from was, after I had got to a point where I felt I knew what I was doing enough, I branched out and started doing things you're not supposed to do. One of the first things I did is I realized, well, if you use your little pinky and use your volume control and you put these two notes together and you kind of bend them a little bit, it can sound like a car horn. And so I would be playing something somewhere in a club, and I'd play a solo, and all of a sudden I'd stick a little car horn in there, and the audience would giggle. And I thought, okay, well, there you go. That you got your foot in the ocean there somehow.
Well, let me ask you something. I mean, you said you were self-taught, and I know, when you're a kid, you came down with mono, and all of a sudden you're playing a guitar, and you're teaching yourself how to play this. Had you gone through like traditional lessons or music college or whatever?
Oh gosh, no. There really wasn't even that. Well, I was from a pretty poor family, so there wasn't that choice to go to college for me. But there also wasn't a college that would teach what I wanted.
Right.
What I wanted to learn was right there on my little turntable.
Right.
I would put on anything that caught my ear, anything that sounded interesting to me, and I'd take it apart and try to figure out how are they doing that? How is he playing that? What is the arrangement? Who's doing what? And that was entirely my education. I mean, I watched a few other local players, but no one was really able to teach me anything. I learned everything by listening to records. And fortunately, I decided, well, I would spread out and try to know a little bit about different things. So I listened to some blues records. I listened to some Chet Atkins records, Andre Segovia records, things that weren't normally in my wheelhouse, as well as, all the Beatles records and all the things. And then right after I started playing, all of a sudden you had the big guys come in, Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck, and then, I was saying, well, wait a minute, now maybe I'd like to do more than just write songs.
Right. Well, what I was getting at is, had you gone down a more traditional road, you might not have been as experimental as you would become. You probably, maybe you would not have figured out that there are things that you're not supposed to do to a guitar because some teacher told you, oh, you're not supposed to do that. Like, it may have actually hurt you than helped you even though I don't. I mean, it's a again, it's a gross assumption, but I would think in some cases maybe that education might have been a hindrance to you.
It probably was for me personally because I use my imagination more than some people do. As I say, there's a lot of people who basically copy other things, and I only did that to learn from. After that, I started thinking, what can I do differently? And when I joined Frank Zappa's band and he discovered me, at one point the music was getting pretty intense for me, and I was trying to learn it by rote, and I said, should I try to learn how to read music now, Frank? And he said exactly what you just said.
Yeah. I was reading about Frank discovering you, and I think every interview I've heard you do, asks you about being discovered by Frank Zappa, and I think it's an amazing story. But there's a part of it that I don't know if you've ever been asked, because if Frank, it's 1977, you're 28 years old. Frank Zappa walks into a bar, and there you are, and in the middle of the show, Frank comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'd like you to join my band or audition for my band." What I have never heard anyone ask you is, did you soil yourself at the very moment that Frank Zappa comes up to you?
No, I mean, I remember afterwards we all celebrated. Everybody was really happy for me that maybe somebody in our world was going to get a break finally. But no, I rose to the occasion because I saw him and I thought, well, it excited me. Here's somebody to play for. Somebody to really impress, and I think he really liked the fact that I could sing so many different styles and sound like different singers. The guitar playing too was there, so I think for Frank it was, oh boy, I don't have to hire a guitar player and a singer. I got it all in one guy here.
Well, but it's Frank Zappa. That's me. That's my. I don't know if I could have risen to the occasion in that situation. I mean, to me, okay, here's a guy, by 1977, most people are aware that Frank Zappa is a genius, and here you are in the middle of, I don't know if it's Kentucky or Ohio or wherever you were, but I mean, I just can't even imagine how exciting that must have been to have been singled out by this legendary genius like a Frank Zappa.
Well, of course, it was, it didn't cause any movements, physical movements in my body or anything, but it certainly made me really, really happy, and I couldn't wait for him to call me. But unfortunately, he went on a long tour, and he didn't call for about 6 months or so. And by then, I was pretty desperate, down to my rent was due and everything else was going bad in my life. And then that phone call came, and that really was the most exciting moment when he actually said, okay, here it is. I'm going to fly you out on this date, and here's the songs that I want you to try to figure out how to sing and play. From that point on, then it became real. And, I knew it was up to me to succeed or fail, and it was very hard to do because those, I mean, Frank's music is very complicated, odd time signatures. Those weren't the things I was used to doing because I was always in cover bands playing songs from the radio. So you don't play an 11 on the radio.
No, that's true. But you spent a lot of time with Frank, and I know it was a pretty intense year learning under this guy. Tell me about what that experience with Frank as a person was like.
Well, Frank really just took me under his wing. I often thought he thought I was his little puppy or something. He treated me like he didn't treat the other guys that way. They were all, Berkeley taught, pretty pro guys who'd been on tours, some of them with him already. But I think he saw in me that I was stupid and green, but I had something there if he could nurture it. And the first thing he did is we had, of course, 3 months of rehearsal scheduled. 3 months.
Yeah.
5 days a week. And on Friday, he said, on Friday, I want you to get in the car with me and go to my house and stay over the weekend, and I'll show you the things that will be coming up in next week. And the rest of the guys will be getting, sheet music, but you'll already have had the time to try to learn it by rote. So, I mean, really, that was a very, very personal way of dealing with me. And I don't think he would have done that for very many people, because almost all of the players he ever had, and I think there's almost 200 of them listed somewhere, I think very few of them were non-readers.
Yeah. That's actually a very kind way to have handled you, because that you could very easily have chewed you up and spit you out if he really wanted to, because it's probably a list of 9,000 other guys that would have killed to have been in your position.
He said later that he auditioned 50 guitar players.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I mean, beyond that, on a daily level, like when we were traveling, I just hung out with Frank. The other guys in the band kind of, I don't know if they really thought much of me. Maybe they thought I was just not ready, or I don't know what they thought of me. But I didn't hang out with them. They all lived in L.A. I didn't. I lived in a tiny apartment with no car, so I just lived Frank music for 24/7 every day all those months, and in the meantime got to be friendly, very friendly. I mean, we would go to dinner and he'd tell me, "Oh, this place is historic, and I ate here with so and so," and tell me stories, and it became more than a musical experience. Definitely.
Frank saw you, like you said, more than just a guitar player, but a guy who had tremendous range as a singer, and even the first few times that I heard you with King Crimson and hearing you do Frame by Frame and Matic Kudasai, and then to see you in a couple performances on YouTube that I've seen of you doing City of Tiny Lights, you realize that he clearly understood what a great singer you were. I mean, even if you'd never picked up a guitar in your life, just your vocals alone would be enough to put you in that Frank Zappa echelon of musicians.
Well, Frank was very, very, interested in vocalists, and some of his bands had vocalists who did nothing but sing. Flo and Eddie and people like that.
Right.
That was their only role in the band. So I think he was happy to find, here's a guy that can do more than that. Because people don't know this about Frank, but he could either play guitar or he could sing. He wasn't coordinated in the ways to do that both. You never will see him in any film play guitar and sing at the same time. You watch, he'll be standing there with his guitar and when he's singing, and then he'll play guitar. So he always needed someone to cover one of those things. And that was my role. When he was singing, I played his guitar stuff, and when I was singing, he could do whatever he wanted. So,
and I think you're also the only guy in the band that could do a Bob Dylan impersonation too, right?
Well, I didn't even know I had that in me, but when I mentioned to him one night at his house that the song he was showing me, the new song called Flakes, sounded like a bad Bob Dylan song, I started singing it like that, just for fun, and that was it. He said, "That's it. You're going to sing it that way. That's in the show."
And didn't he introduce you to Bob Dylan at one point?
No, he did not. Paul Simon introduced me to Bob Dylan, who was standing in a stairwell at the back of a club, and Paul opened the door and said, "I want to introduce you." Someone opened the door, and there's Bob Dylan standing there. And he said, "Hey, Bob, this is Adrian Belew I've been telling you about." And he goes, "I heard about you." And I thought, I wonder if he's talking about the Zappa thing. I hope that's not what he heard about, because I mean, it was done in fun. I hope he understood that.
No, absolutely. So how did you meet David Bowie? Because I know it kind of happened. I mean, was it kind of an abrupt thing? Were you playing with Zappa at the time and then met David, or was you off the road by that point?
No, this is a pretty interesting story. It's a long story, but I'll tell you how I actually just met him. We were playing in Berlin, and there was a place in the show where Terry Bozzio, the drummer, and Patrick O'Hearn and Frank would play a long extended guitar solo, just improvising. So the other people in the band would leave the stage, and as I was leaving the stage, I looked over at the monitor mixer area, and I saw David Bowie and Iggy Pop standing there on the stage. And so I thought, oh my gosh, this is really something. I had played a lot of David's songs in cover bands.
Right.
And I have to say something, So I walked over and shook his hand and said, I just want to say to you, thank you for all the great music you've done. I really appreciate what you are and who you are and what you do. And he said, hey, that's great. How would you like to be in my band?
Oh my God!
And I looked back on the stage and I said, "Well, I'm kind of working with that guy, right there." Of course, making a joke. And he said, "Okay, well, I'll meet you back at the hotel and in the lobby, and we'll go out to dinner and we'll talk about it."
Wow. So how did dinner go?
Well, you want to know the rest of that story? It's a fascinating story. I'll tell you.
Yes, absolutely.
So I went back to the lobby, and there was David and his assistant Coco sitting kind of behind a plant on a sofa. And I walked over, and they kind of said, "Hey, just go to your room, get in the elevator, go to your room for 5 minutes, and then come back down. We'll have a car waiting outside." I thought, oh, I see. This is like a spy novel kind of thing. So that's what I did. I came out. The chauffeur opened the car door. I got in the back of the car with David. He excitedly started talking about everything we were going to do together and the songs and how much he liked what I did. And finally, we arrived at the restaurant. We walked in the front door of the restaurant, and there was Frank Zappa and the rest of the band sitting there. Yeah, I was busted, as you say. And so what happened next? David said, "Well, let's sit down with him." We sat down, and David started trying to be friendly with Frank, and he said, "That's quite a guitar player you have here, Frank." And Frank took a sip off of his cigarette and said, "Fuck you, Captain Tom." And not Major Tom, by the way, Captain Tom. He had already demoted David down just for being there. And then David said, well, you sure? I mean, could we just talk about this? And Frank took another minute, said, "Fuck you, Captain Tom." David gave it one more try. "Are you sure you don't want to hear me out?" "Fuck you, Captain Tom." And that was it. So we said, "Okay, thanks." And we got up and we left the restaurant. We went down the stairs and the chauffeur opened the door and David said, "I thought that went rather well." That is true for every word, because the year that I went to a show once and I met, years later, I met one of the crew members who was there at that dinner, and I had told that story on stage because it wasn't a gig, it was a award show.
Okay.
And I was the MC. And so he told me, that guy said, that you tell that story exactly as it happened. That's exactly what happened. So I've never changed a word of it because it is exactly what I remember.
That is a great story.
The only reason that David Bowie was there was because 2 nights before we had played in another place in Germany, and Brian Eno was there. And Brian Eno knew that David was looking to find a new guitar player for his upcoming tour. So that's why he suggested that David Bowie come and see me playing with Frank Zappa.
So the Berlin trilogy of Bowie's career. So you're on the final album, Lodgers, of that trilogy. And it's one of those mythologized moments in music between him and Tony Visconti and Brian Eno. What's the reality of that? Did it really live up to the mythology of it, or was it just like another great gig for you?
Well, for me, it was my first ever recording session with someone, and it was in Lake Geneva, Switzerland. And it was Brian Eno and David Bowie, and as you say, Tony Visconti. So it was extraordinary for me. Plus, we were staying in a hotel that overlooked Lake Geneva. My room had a balcony that, right over the lake. And in the room next to me was Tony Visconti and his wife, who was Mary, with the girl who sang, "Those were the days, those were the days." Mary, what's her
Oh,
name?
gosh.
I can't think of her name. And anyway, she would wake up in the morning and do these beautiful vocal exercises out on the balcony that would wake me up, and it sounded like an angel waking me up. So pretty much everything about it was extraordinary. And I got there after the band had done most of the tracking, and so it left me with a lot of time just being the only one with those three guys. And what was curious about it was the control room was on one floor, then you walked up these concrete stairs, and the recording room was above it, and there was a one-way television camera there, so they could see me. I couldn't see them. All I could hear in the headphones is what they would say, and they said to me right off the bat, we're not going to let you hear any of this music. We want to get your accidental responses. So you'll go upstairs and you'll put the headphones on, music will start, and you just play something with it, figure it out.
Wow.
And I said, what key? And they said, nope, you don't get to know what key. So I would hear the drummer, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the song would start, and I'd go, okay. And they would usually allow me to do that maybe 2 times, 3 times through. And by then I might even know the chorus was coming up now or something. But then they would take what they considered the moments that they liked and compile from those one guitar track, make a comp track. It was totally unlike anything I'd ever heard about in all my years of listening to records. Here's how we make records. No, that's not the way we make records. So I was really not prepared for it, but certainly game for it. I mean, they loved it. Every time I came down, they were raving. Oh, there was one place at 5:03, he played a brilliant thing, So I'm, okay, fine. Great, guys.
I read Chris Franz's book from the Talking Heads a while back, and I interviewed him too, and he talked about Brian Eno and just his approach to things. Clearly with Remain in Light, like I said, there was a kind of like a Brian Wilson type of modular thing. It's like everything's there. It's like a puzzle pieced together. Where I don't know if that was something that he kind of figured out by working with David Bowie for those records, or if that was something that he had been working on his own, but clearly that was a way that he really challenged himself to do things.
And that was
way.
the second record I did.
Yeah, I know.
So I went from the fire to the boiling pan, or whatever you want to call it. 2 records in a row with Brian Eno, and I didn't know anymore how they made records. I was not sure anymore. So, I thought that you went in and played together as a band, but up to that point, 2 records in, I hadn't done that yet.
No, we talked about King Crimson and talking about finally getting a chance to exercise your songwriting muscle a little bit, and like I said, your solo. I mean, you're now about to release your 25th solo record, and so much of your solo stuff is. The melodies are fantastic. The singing is great. The guitar playing is amazing. But there's a lot of very experimental things that kind of go in between, and maybe they're the kind of glue that brings all those albums together. Between working with Bowie and Zappa and Robert Fripp, are all those things that are you taking things you've learned from all 3 of them and applying it to your solo work, or do you think that would have happened even without working with those guys?
Well, I think the bulk of what I rely on, if I'm dipping back into my past knowledge, is things that I learned when I was younger. All the Beatles records and Hendrix and all those kinds of things were the things that I learned the most from. You're kind of set up from that point on. That you can branch out from there. But, of course, I think everything I learned from the real-life experiences with all those people and more was, invaluable to me. And the last solo record I did, my friend Rob Fetters, I'll bring him up again from the Bears.
Yeah.
The last solo record called Pop-Sided, Rob just raves about that record, and he says what he loves about it is everything I've ever done seems to be represented in this one record. It's like it's all come back now, and I'm covering little bits that you recognize this from there and this from there, but I don't think of it that way, and I don't recognize it that way. To me, it's just using every bit of knowledge I have and all my curiosity and imagination. Each time I make a record, I'm out to just, do something that I would love to hear.
When you're taking on new projects now, how are you approaching it all? Are you looking to kind of bridge out and just try new creative ventures, or is it just you're kind of in a pocket now and you kind of feel you're in a comfortable spot?
I don't know if I'm comfortable because I don't think that's necessarily going to ever happen because I always want to move forward. What it is, though, is I've accepted where I am, who I am, what I do. I've accepted the things that I'm not. When I started writing as a teenager, I thought I was going to write pop hits, Well, that never really happened. So, but I always did like experimental things, even within the Beatles music. If you listen to a song like Tomorrow Never Knows on Revolver, that's as experimental as pop music ever got.
Yeah.
So I always felt like, well, I have my foot in both those camps. And now, I guess, where I am is I just want to get as much new stuff done in my life, create as much new material, and touch as many different things as I can with my creativity, because that's all I'm about, really. That's all I'm about. I'm not trying to be the world's best anything, or I don't keep up with who's in the top 20 guitar players or any of that kind of stuff. It's not about that for me. It's all about using the imagination I've been given to do things that hopefully other people would like, but that's actually secondary to sound selfish, but what it's all about is pleasing myself, because really I hear things or I see things and I want to translate them so I can share them with other people. What is art and music if it's not about communicating? So, it'd be nice if I could communicate to millions of people, because I feel like, that's the more the merrier. But a lot of artists in their day, and I'm not comparing myself to any of them, but look at Van Gogh.
Yeah, right.
He never got to communicate his art to hardly anyone. So I feel blessed that I've been able to do all the stuff I'm doing. I'm just going to continue.
I hear that answer, and all I can think of is the lyrics to "Oh Daddy," and you're basically saying the same thing, 30 some odd years ago about exactly that. Your kid saying, "Dad, why aren't you a rock star yet?" And the answer in the song and the answer you just gave are very, very consistent, and that's really interesting.
Well, it was fun to do that song, and it was the reason for doing that song was because my little girl was 10 years old and really was fascinated with what goes on in the studio, Dad, and can I sing something? Oh, okay, here, let me write something that you can help me do. And it occurred to me that they might be thinking that about now, because, everyone was asking me, well, when are you going to put out a hit record? And I'm like, well, I don't go at it that way. I wish it was that easy, that there's a formula,
Yeah, I know there's a new album out called Elevator. Where does that stand? Is that coming out this summer, or is it being delayed even further?
No, it'll definitely be coming out soon. It's sitting there just waiting for a final touch or two. It needs to be mastered. And I got really I wanted to have it out right now. I've wanted to have it out for a long time. But I said this the other day to someone, and they agree with me. During COVID, I made the record, and I also taught myself how to do digital art and kept myself creating and things. But there was nothing I could do, And then all of a sudden, there's everything to do. Now you've got all of a sudden, you've got to put together a show. You got to get your gear ready. You've got to do this. You got to do that. You got to put your NFTs up there ready. You got to finish out the album. And so all of those things have sort of eaten away at my normal ability to just focus and say, let's get this one thing done. I'm trying to get 5 things done at once, and the record is suffering from that. But the record is finished. I mean, I listened to it, and I'm really in love with this record. I really like it a lot. I'm just saying, for me, it hits where I was hoping to go, and I can't wait to get it out to people.
I can't wait.
We're at the point now with it where wouldn't it be better to wait until we are doing some shows, so there'll be more of awareness and maybe people will pick up the record. Normally, I wouldn't even put out a new record without touring at the same time, because that's where we sell our CDs. People buy them when they come to the show that night, and they go, "Oh, wow, I love this guy. I'm going to buy one of his CDs. What do you got? Oh, well, here's his brand new record." Okay. Otherwise, they may not ever buy it because people don't really buy CDs much anymore.
Yeah, but
and of course, we have it as downloads and all those other things, but I'm an artist, so I put a lot of artwork in and thought into the packaging. So the CD still matters to me.
It matters to me too. I mean, in some respects, COVID has allowed me to save a little bit of money and maybe go and buy some CDs, fill in the gaps of stuff. I have always said I love that tactile sensation of having something to hold that an MP3 can never give you. But holding a CD or a piece of vinyl. Something else is coming. It was inside the sleeve. I appreciate the effort that an artist takes to make something like that a special item. I've always appreciated that.
Well, when I was young, and as I said, I was learning from records. There were little 45s you put on your little record player that your grandmother had given you for Christmas, and then that went away. And then there was vinyl records, big albums where the artwork was really big, and that was fun to design artwork for that. And that went away, and then they shrunk it down to being CDs, and I thought, okay, I got used to that and started loving CDs. And now they've shrunken it down to there's no artwork. And, I find, and there's no, my words are important to me.
Yeah.
I want people to be able to read them if they care. And this new record, Elevator, is going to have 38 digital paintings in it. So, I mean, one section is a bunch of paintings spread over 2 pages. So they're not big paintings, but 8 of the paintings, make up or have their own panel. So, or 6 of them, I should say. So all total, you get 38 paintings you can look at, and that's why I would rather have someone. Can you spend $20, please, just to look at this? You spend more than that at McDonald's, I guess. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Hey, Adrian, it is a real pleasure to finally talk to you. I did feel like I had to get anybody's permission this time, and it was a real joy. So thank you very much for spending some time today.
My pleasure. I just want everybody to say I love you guys out there, and I'm not stopping. So keep coming.
Appreciate it, Adrian. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care. Again, Adrian Belew's new solo record is going to be called Elevator. It'll be out this summer. If you've never heard his solo work, do yourself a favor and discover it. It is wonderful, wonderful music. Thank you so much for listening today. I do appreciate it. I'd love to know what you think. You can always email me at bax@rock102.com. We'll see you next time. And thanks again for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.